Hey y'all, I'm Amy. I'm here today to talk about A New Hope. This is the first Star Wars film before Star Wars became the enormous, massive, mega franchise.
Here's some money. Go see a Star Wars
universe taking over thing that it is. It started as just Star Wars, a single film released in 1977, and it's a great film. It's a really good movie, and I don't see a lot of commentary about it, probably because it came out, we're coming up on 45 years ago. So understandably, most of the commentary that you see about Star Wars has been focused on the newer entries in the Star Wars series. But I thought it would be cool to kind of go back and look at all of the Star Wars films in order. So let me start by saying that I am not a Star Wars expert. I think the Star Wars universe is super interesting. I'm going to talk a good bit, especially in the first kind of review I'm doing about the world that George Lucas really created here and how complex it is and how it's amazing that we're able to still pull compelling stories out of this world decades later, which is definitely not a given and something that you'll see a lot of media really try to have this experience and fail pretty badly. So I do think that the world is interesting, but I did not read all of the extended universe novels. I have not played all of the video games. I'm just a pretty filthy casual fan. I just like it. I like Star Wars. I think it's fun. Sometimes I hate it a little bit. Sometimes I'm really disappointed in it, but for the most part, I enjoy it. And so these aren't going to be hot takedowns of why Star Wars is actually the worst thing ever and nobody should watch Star Wars and that's also not me. Like, I enjoy stuff, and I also like to think critically about the media that I consume. And so, even when I absolutely love something, I will spend some time afterwards picking it apart and thinking about how well it works. And what I mean by that is, like, what was the goal of the book or the movie or the TV show? What were they trying to achieve? How did they try to achieve it? And were their methods effective? And so that can be everything from the storytelling, which is kind of mostly what I focus on because I like writing. I'm kind of hobbyist writer myself. And so I like to spend a lot of time thinking about the effectiveness of storytelling and how stories are crafted, how they're plotted, the themes that are kind of present throughout works, character development and character arcs, and kind of the journeys that we go on with various characters in stories and how we relate to them and how kind of their experiences can shape our own. So that's usually kind of where I focus my critique. I'm not a film expert, so I don't often notice things that are film related. I mean, if it's not like glaringly bad, I probably don't notice it. I was an extra on a few different TV shows and films in college just for the money. So I'm not hopelessly ignorant about how filmmaking works, but I'm not by any means an expert, and that's just not going to be the focus of kind of the things I talk about. Part 1, the beginning. So let's get started. Let's dive right in. One of the things that I love about it is that it really has this great, strong opening. Iconic, obviously, the A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, the title screen, the music, the incredible score, which sounds maybe a little bit like Whole Planet Suite, but like it's still just so good. I don't care that it sounds kind of similar to some of the movements in that. And you've got the opening crawl, that kind of the exposition that kind of sets us up where we are. And it does like a lot with very little there of setting up this conflict between the Empire and the Rebels, the Civil War situation, and introducing us to kind of the first major plot point of the plans, the Death Star plans that have been obtained in battle that they're secretly trying to smuggle so that they can do something about this massive weapon that the Empire has. Just a kind of a couple of things about the way this conflict is set up initially. The opening crawl explicitly says that the Empire is evil. I think this is really interesting that this is in the first paragraph of everything that is Star Wars. It all starts with this kind of assumed the Empire is bad. And why I think that's interesting is because I think that this story, it definitely is written to appeal to children. It definitely has the good versus evil thing going on. But it's like also surprisingly nuanced in some ways. And it's interesting that it kind of immediately starts with like, no, this is a black and white story. And then it kind of shows maybe some deviations from there. It never like deviates as much from the black and white universe, like black and white storytelling that as I would like. I do think that like it's super trendy right now, and for there to be gray antagonists, for there to be like morally dubious protagonists, and sort of like an exploration of good versus evil and nuance and what it means to do good actions, and can good actions have evil consequences, and are evil people irredeemable, and Star Wars, to be fair, does have quite a bit to say about redemption. I think that that's obviously a major theme in the third film, but it's just interesting to me the way that like the Empire is initially characterized as evil, and it's pretty evil in this movie. When you watch kind of all of the scenes with the Imperial officers around the table where they're kind of talking about stuff, and I mean, they are just baddies. Like, they are the bad guys. It's not ambiguous. It's not like, oh, the Empire, maybe they have some good ideas and like this is actually about the good of the people. Like they make it very clear very early that the Empire is a negative force in this galaxy. Like, this is bad. And also kind of interestingly that the old ways were better. Princess Leia is introduced as a princess in the opening crawl, like she's described as the, Princess Leia, but then we later learn in some of her early scenes that she's a member of the Imperial Senate. And again, I know that like all of this is like later clarified, like I know what she's the princess of, and yes. But it's interesting from kind of the opening's perspective, because when you don't know, like in the beginning, it's like, is she a princess in this like fairy tale princess sort of sense? If she's the princess, who's the king? Like, who's the, is that a thing? It kind of sets up that idea of, her political importance that might be inherited, and then later shown to be, like that she has some sort of office. Of course, they dissolved that Senate real quick too. But like, I don't know. I thought that the kind of political world building that they start setting up here is really interesting. It's maybe more interesting because they don't dive in like super deep on this topic. I think the very heavy-handed political maneuvering stuff that comes up later in The Phantom Menace is just not the world's most thrilling blockbuster movie content, but the like opening kind of politics are really good. And then after we have kind of the opening crawl, we're right into the action, and we're in this is that kind of opening that's called in medias res. The plans have been stolen. Like, we've already established that the plans are stolen. Again, I know that there's like this little movie later on that kind of shows us a little bit more about how the plans were stolen, but just like, we're just talking about, and I'm going to try to do this for the most part. I want to talk about these movies kind of on their own. I do think where they fit into the bigger Star Wars picture obviously is interesting and worth examining. But before you have that context, and the reason I'm kind of doing this in order, like, I think it's important to look at like the world that they built initially, and then see how effective what George Lucas and everyone who worked on the film was doing, came from like their initial design, and not like the retconning that happened afterwards. And oh boy, is there a lot of retconning in this. George Lucas, he was definitely the kind of director who can't really leave his work alone. There's a lot of creators like that. I was going to try to like say something here, like the kind of a nuanced take on, is an author meddling with their work after it's been released? Are there circumstances where that could be a good thing? And maybe, Like, I would totally acknowledge that there could be, and please let me know, like, if you can think of a good example of that. But on the whole, I'm gonna say no. Like, I don't think we really benefit very much from authors kind of re-examining their own work, which is kind of interesting when you think about it, because like it's their creation. Like, this is something that George Lucas made. He sold it to Disney eventually and it kind of went out of his control, but like, he made this and it was his. And so his perspective on it is one of the most important ones. But is it the only perspective that matters? Part 2, authorial intent. This is a whole argument about authorial intent versus death of the author, basically looking at who gets the final say on a piece of media. I don't think there's like a clear-cut answer to that. I don't think that there's like a thing where we say, we never consider anything that the author thinks about their own work. Get out of here, authors. Like, like obviously not. But also, like, the author's voice and opinion on their work is not the only one that matters. And I think what makes the after the release meddling so irritating to a lot of people, and certainly to myself, is that the perspective that we have on the work came from that first experience that we had with it, and then later re-examinations. And when that work keeps changing and keeps shifting and we keep getting more context around it, like, our opinions necessarily, you know, are impacted as well. And it feels like the kind of personal relationship that I have with a work, it, in some ways, is kind of sacred to me. Like, in some ways, it can be important to me, and, you know, an important aspect of who I am is kind of what I like and what I, you know, think back to and reference and use as the vocabulary when I'm talking about like my experiences in the world. I talk a lot about like Luke's kind of journey, which I'm going to go into more later, but like the hero's journey that Luke goes on in A New Hope, and kind of what it means for him and in his like youth and adolescence. And that was like really meaningful to me. And I saw it before, you know, I saw it when I was a kid, when I was more than a decade younger than Luke is in the story, and now I'm more than a decade older than Luke is in the story, and just seeing kind of how my own life and my own experiences has changed the way I look at Luke and the way I look at the journey that he goes on. Like, that is really meaningful to me. And so when someone kind of goes in, and not that a lot was really changed with Luke or anything, but when someone kind of goes in and then makes changes to that outside of just like the changes that are happening to me personally, it's harder to keep that kind of consistent view on the work. And I also think there are things where even if the author intended them to happen, maybe it was better without it. That's a thing that kind of happens sometimes. And a really great example of that is right in this first film, and it's a scene that everyone knows because, oh boy, do people get upset about it. But this is, of course, the scene where Han and Greedo are having their altercation, and the source of this drama is over who shoots first, and what does this mean to these characters. It's a quick scene in a 2-hour movie. It's pretty short, but it's one of those establishing scenes for Han's character, and so it was important to a lot of people, right? This could either show, like, depending on who you believe shoots first in this altercation between them, that Han Solo is like a ruthless kind of guy who, no nonsense, like, he sees a gun pointed at him, he's just pew, out, off you go. Or he's just responding in self-defense to someone who's shooting at him actively, and so he's like a good guy, I guess. Sometimes I like wonder how much of the issues that we have with this is like, is George Lucas, like, does he see things in this very black and white way? Like, which I think the answer is sometimes yes, because one of his kind of cited reasons for, in the original cut, it seems kind of like Han fires his gun first. But George Lucas, you know, has said that he didn't feel that the kind of person who will ultimately end up with Princess Leia should be this kind of bad guy, like he's a good guy. And that's an interesting perspective to say the least. Like that in order to get Princess Leia, who is kind of treated as an object in this way of talking about her, that you have to be good enough, worthy enough, which it's a little infantilizing there. I mean, I feel like Princess Leia, who is, introduced as very much this badass, right? Like she is not maybe like super effective with her blaster, but she's got one and she's like trying to fight her way out of this situation when they capture her in the beginning. And she like defies openly, just stands up to and defies and mocks basically Darth Vader on their first kind of interaction. And whereas most people in this are pretty scared of him for somewhat obvious reasons. I mean, he goes around kind of just choking people, but Leia stands up to him, and Leia is clearly like involved in this rebellion and this act of defiance, which puts her life in danger, clearly. Like the Empire is out here trying to crush this rebellion. They've gone so far as to make a planet-killing weapon to instill fear and keep these people in line. And so for her to kind of openly defy that world and then clandestinely also work kind of against it says to me that not only is she good, like good in the sense of she's on the good side of this conflict, but also like she's not really lawful, right? Like this is kind of the D&D alignment stuff that I'm talking about here, but like, she's not, she while she's kind of working within her like diplomatic role, she's also breaking the rules here. Like she's breaking these laws. So I feel like people who are, not lawful good, you could say she's probably neutral good. Most of the kind of protagonists in this would have less of an issue with a character like Han. He's sort of a mercenary type. He is kind of in it for himself and in it for the money and not necessarily for a cause. And so that's really a bigger clash to me than if he just just knocks off Greedo over here, who's like got a gun drawn on him, which I feel like in most places, if someone has a gun drawn on you, usually you're within your rights to defend yourself regardless of whether they shoot it or not. Like they're attacking you with a deadly weapon. That's usually kind of enough. Like I don't necessarily think that particular reinterpretation really adds anything. And if anything, it just kind of takes away from the perspective that most people had on Han. He's tough. Like he's a tough, no nonsense guy who is not going to just sit by and let someone else shoot him. And that's part of what we admire in Han, is that like similar to Princess Leia, he's defiant. He stands up to himself. He doesn't lay down and take it when somebody attacks him. That's what we like about him. So changing that, taking that away, really, really annoyed people. And I think just kind of generally a lot of the meddling that George Lucas does, it's not like consequential in that way, but it's just unnecessary. Like a lot of additional CGI, bad CGI. Like maybe this was his original vision for like what Mos Eisley looks like, but I think the vision that he had on film originally worked pretty well and really didn't need any more kind of stuff. And I guess I get from the creative sense this impulse when something is so part of you, like when you've created something and it is such a part of who you are and what you are, that you want it to be like, if not perfect, like you want it to be exactly what you had in mind. And the translation between kind of the creative vision that someone has and the reality that they end up with can be dissatisfying, especially if you're relatively new at doing things. And so maybe there's some aspects of this here of like, as George Lucas became more experienced and more confident behind the camera, he was able to see the flaws, that and couldn't kind of unsee the flaws maybe in his own work, and felt like in order to really have it true to his vision that he needed to change it to fix it after the fact. I think that's a really natural impulse, and I think that we are our own worst critics most of the time, and that we tend to see issues with our own work that other people don't, and maybe are blind to the real issues that actually do exist. I mean, there's several places in A New Hope where, like, you see that the new CGI that he kind of added is in there, and you're like, that wasn't needed. That's kind of weird and out of place. But then there's, like, still some pretty bad actual effects, like the, like, lightning, like, kind of stuff, like when they zap R2-D2 and the lightning is just like really cheesy, and you're kind of like, well, if I were gonna like fix some CGI in something, or fix something with CGI in this film, maybe that's the thing that I would have fixed. And I'm not just saying that to like be like, George Lucas, go and fix that, because I like honestly like that's just like me like looking for something that could perhaps benefit from it. I don't really think that it's necessary at all. I think we could just like leave the theatrical cut alone. In fact, I think it's usually like a good idea to do so. I'm sort of a purist in terms of media. I like to see unedited, original kind of, and okay, unedited is not the right word because clearly all this stuff gets edited, but like the original edit of something. And if there need to be future edits, fan edits, re-edits by the creator because the studio interfered and this was actually their original intention, I think all those things are fine as long as we keep the original available too. Like, I think it's the problem with Star Wars is that a lot of those originals are really hard to find, and in some cases may not even exist anymore, because George Lucas started meddling with it really early, and it replaced, you know, the actual, when you go and watch A New Hope on Disney Plus, you see the version that he edited last in, I think, 2010 or something. I don't know, like. So there's like no 1977 New Hope out there for you if you're, and what's funny is it feels like there would be more money if they were to just kind of sell the 1977 original version of New Hope and then the 2003 remake of the blah blah blah, you know, like they could sell them as different things alongside each other and people would like eat that shit up. So I don't know why they don't really, but all that is to say that Authorial Intent, Death of the Author, both interesting perspectives. I don't think that either is fully the only way of thinking about things. I like to kind of land somewhere in the middle. Part 3, world building and genre. So let's talk about world building and the setting and kind of the genre of these films. A New Hope really does so much to set up the universe that Star Wars is in and the rules that it plays by, and in such a way that I think that when there are later violations of these rules, and there are some, those things can really be like difficult and hard to kind of reconcile with the Star Wars that we all have in our heads after watching A New Hope. But basically, A New Hope is set in space, clearly. Like, space isn't really important to it. It's kind of interesting. Space is really a convenience, I feel like. It's like, it lets us set this kind of sort of pseudo-futuristic alternate, you know, obviously this is not supposed to be within our galaxy, but people are there, but like not any really recognizable animals or things, like other than maybe like the gonk droid. The world is not ours, you know, and this is not a future of Earth. So it doesn't have to be tied to Earth kind of civilizations and concepts and, you know, histories and things, which is good, probably. Watch Star Trek if you're looking for that kind of thing. So the Star Wars universe, you know, it's human race, bunch of other alien races, it's a bunch of like alien planets with different environments, all of them habitable for the most part. Really nothing is really thought about in terms of like the logistics of space travel. There's really not a lot of discussion about transmission delays or like, you know, the amount of time that it takes to get from planet to planet. Like, all of these planets can support life. They're all seems to be relatively close together. I mean, they talk like all of the kind of conversation about space logistics is more or less like, it feels kind of just like filler. It feels like it's there to just color the world and make it feel more real, but none of it really has a basis, at least at this point, in logic, which is why you end up with things like Han's bragging about the Kessel Run and talking about a unit of distance rather than a unit of time, parsec. And there's like, again, there's just like everything else in Star Wars. There's some sort of little retcons and things that happens to that. Oh, of course, but what they actually mean, like I'm okay with just like that being a flaw, like that being wrong. Like I'm okay with whoever wrote that just being like, parsec sounds more science-y, let's use that word, and not really realizing what a parsec is, you know, like that was fine for me. I don't know if I'm just like less picky about stuff maybe, but that's just not one of the kind of things that I felt like was an important detail that really needed to be explored in more depth. But space in Star Wars never really feels like a threat. And I think in a lot of science fiction, and I'll point to The Expanse here because I think it's one of the best kind of science fiction properties I've ever really seen. And certainly one of the best that's, you know, currently produced. Well, into season 6 is like right around the corner and I'm going to miss it a lot. But in The Expanse, the cold vacuum of space feels real. It feels present always. It feels like they are always in danger at any moment of all the air getting blown out and they're just dead, frozen, just dead. In a way that I've never once really thought of when it comes to Star Wars. Like, they're technically on spaceships. There's a lot of beautiful, beautiful establishing shots that really give us a sense of the scale of these ships, and they're just enormous. And I think all of that does so much for the tone of the movie and the kind of a lot of the theme of the movie. The little guy theme is like a lot of it's represented through these beautiful establishing shots of the Rebel spaceships versus like the Empire spaceships, but that's kind of all that really matters about them. Like their capabilities in terms of weaponry, their capabilities in terms of technology, and how advanced one side is and how disadvantaged the rebellion really is. The actual details of anti-gravity, you know, like how they can just all walk around on these ships as if gravity is just functioning normally, how they can all fly past the speed of light and there's like no sort of time effects on that, or like, we got here and 5 years have passed for this place and it's been an hour for us. Like, none of that's really explored, and I'm okay with it. That's not to say that I think it should be, that like, it's just that that's not what this is. This is science fantasy, something that people often talk about when they talk about Star Wars. Not just the Force aspects of it, which the Force is just like straight up magic, right? Like, it's just like magic. But other than just the Force being magic and there being like, you know, this kind of religious magic aspect to it that is shown to be real, that is not like just, oh, they believe in the Force and oh, the Force is going to save them, but then it's kind of ambiguous. Like the Force is just straight up real and it's magic. And so of course that's fantasy. You know, I say that, but like there's probably some people out there who are like, what do you mean magic isn't real? But just the setting of Star Wars is kind of impossible. Like, you know, I mean, at least in the laws of physics as we understand them, on close examination, don't make a lot of sense. We're not really capable of rationalizing them, and that's okay. I don't think we really need to. It's just a setting. It's just a cool, different setting. I think you could basically tell this same story on Earth, like with current modern politics. I think that story is sort of Vietnam sometimes. Like there's definitely some aspects that mirror the struggles in the Vietnam War and other conflicts. I think a lot of that is, you know, political commentary by George Lucas. So whenever someone's like, oh, don't talk about the politics of Star Wars, is like, did you guys watch those movies? Like they really like the opening crawl, we're like straight into the politics, right? I don't think it's really possible to talk about Star Wars without it. And maybe to the kind of the crowd that goes and are just like, I want to see a lightsaber battle and I want to see spaceships shooting at each other. Maybe, you know, there honestly is enough in Star Wars that you could probably ignore the political themes and message almost entirely. But I don't know that was the intent. I definitely don't think that was the intent. And that's not what I get from it. Like, I definitely get more of the political kind of aspects of it, at least in New Hope, are more interesting to me. Part 4, Luke Skywalker and the Hero's Journey. Let's talk about The Hero's Journey. So The Hero's Journey was this book published by Joseph Campbell. I think in the 50s. And a lot of people have pointed to how the kind of story that Campbell was describing, and he was not trying to say that he created, like he's not, I'm the creator of the hero's journey or the discoverer of like the hero's journey even, is more of, he was describing basically like an archetypal kind of myth, this and the kind of characters that were within it and the major kind of events that happen. And it's something that I think is just one of those stories that transcends time and transcends culture and is just meaningful to a lot of different people. And so the hero's journey is basically, young kind of protagonist. In a lot of cases, this can be someone who's kind of coming of age, like relatively new to this world, goes through a series of trials and obstacles and comes out of it with this kind of new perspective. They have been changed and they have had some kind of impact on this world through their trials, and they've had like this wise mentor character, and like there's all these kind of stages within it. And basically Luke's story within this very closely follows the outline of the hero's journey. In the old Red Letter Media reviews of the prequel trilogy, there's a section on the, as he calls it, the protagonist. And I think that one thing that A New Hope does really, really well is it creates this extremely likable and identifiable protagonist in Luke. And it's kind of funny actually when you watch like Luke's like intro scene, because he is kind of a brat, I guess. If you were to read it a little differently, like some of the lines that he has in the beginning, my absolute favorite line.
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
I mean, he's kind of whiny, he's kind of annoying, he's kind of a teenager. I definitely feel that more now that I'm older. But also I don't, because I think that Luke is shown as someone who kind of wants more in almost a Disney sense, even though these weren't Disney films at the time. But when you're watching the kind of golden age of Disney movies, and when I'm talking golden age, I mean like the ones that came out when I was a kid, the movies like A Little Mermaid, or I guess it's The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, those characters, and those three particularly are pretty strong in terms of like a similarity to the plot. They all have an I Want song. It's part of your world in Little Mermaid. It's actually Belle doesn't really get like so much of it. Like, I mean, in the Belle song that introduces you to the town, she talks about how much she wants so much more than this provincial life, and then the kind of scene where she's out there in the beautiful like meadow and she wants adventure in the great wide somewhere. And then Aladdin obviously is, like stuck with the kind of his life as this thief and, just trying to keep ahead of, like, that's One Jump, I guess is the song, of this life that he has had no choice but to live, and how, he hates how everyone like looks at him and he wants them to really see that there's more to him. And I think that that's kind of who Luke is at the beginning of the film. And there's something about that experience that I feel like is just something that pretty much everyone can relate to. I mean, maybe not your like Buddhist monks or something who've like decided to shun the concept of desire, but like I think the vast majority of people like want something, like we want something bigger or better. And I think a lot of people, especially people who grew up in kind of like suburban America, which was my background, get this like feeling by the time that you're in high school that you're like, this is the worst place in the world and I hate it and it's so boring, and if I could only go someplace more interesting and I could be something more, and it just feels like so full of promise. And so I think that's where like Luke is when we meet him. He hates working on this farm with his aunt and his uncle's kind of a dick. And he just like hates being here on Tatooine, this like backwater planet that's just not important in the grand scheme of things. And he's ready to join the Imperial Academy, which I think is actually interesting and not something that's talked about a lot. Is that, Luke says pretty early in the film that he wants to submit his application to the academy this year, not next year, like he talked about with Uncle Owen. And I think That's pretty interesting because this is his only option. For someone like Luke with his background, I'm not talking about his like later revealed background, but like what he's grown up believing about himself and the world that he lives in, the only way out of it, like off of this planet and out of this boring, labor intensive life that he has, is by joining the Empire, is by joining up with the military. And again, I think that's an experience that a lot of people have had and can identify with. That military service, even when military service with a group that is explicitly evil, like explicitly described, the Empire is described as evil. And Luke himself, when he's talking to Obi-Wan later, talks about how he hates the Empire, but what is he gonna do about it? He hates the Empire, but he's also just like ready to join up. And you kind of wonder if like an alternate world where, R2-D2 and C-3PO don't end up in Luke's house and Luke does go off and joins the academy. In that world, does he defect? Probably, right? I mean, his buddy, and this isn't really shown on screen. I think it was in like an extended, or they cut one of these scenes, but his buddy Biggs, that kind of shows up at the end of the film to do the trench run, did get to go to the academy like the previous year, and his backstory expanded upon later. Everything always gets kind of expanded upon at some point later. Biggs obviously joins the rebellion, like he defects and leaves the Imperial Army, Air Force, stormtroopers, whatever the fuck. And he joins the rebellion, and you kind of wonder if like Luke would have still ended up in this story, like in some alternate version of it. I'm sure there's a fanfic out there. If he had actually gone to the academy on time and hadn't been there to help with R2-D2, then the question is like, what does Obi-Wan do? Like, would he get off the planet anyway? Probably. Obi-Wan seems pretty resourceful. I think it's actually interesting that Obi-Wan tells Luke that he needs him at this point, because it doesn't really seem like he does. And maybe this is just like Obi-Wan's connection with the Force that is telling him that Luke is important in this and that he needs to come along for this ride. But like Obi-Wan seems like he's pretty much got his shit together up until the kind of inevitable happens when he confronts Darth Vader. It doesn't really seem like Luke was super necessary to the story, which is sometimes a feeling that I get reading Harry Potter as well. I think it's another good story with a very strong good versus evil, especially in the early books and movies, not a super nuanced good versus evil, like Slytherin is just evil, and whatever anyone tried to do afterwards to kind of justify the existence of just this evil house within the school is just kind of like... But they're like evil though, which I could go into a whole thing about the whole vilifying of people being ambitious, which, okay. We're going to just put a pin in Harry Potter. I'll get to it eventually. One day I'm going to do a series like this about Harry Potter. The emotional baggage of Harry Potter in 2022, I guess it is now. Oh shit. It's just a lot. So let's stick with Star Wars. Good old Star Wars. Okay, so when Luke is pulled into the plot, and he's pulled into it kind of through a series of coincidences, which is, like they are, but they aren't. Like it's kind of, is it really a coincidence that Obi-Wan lives so close to Luke? No, obviously, as talked about later. Is it a coincidence that C-3PO and R2-D2 end up with him? Maybe, kind of. I mean, it's a pretty big galaxy, but sometimes it feels like the only planets on this galaxy are like Tatooine and like maybe Alderaan sometimes. I mean, it's a small, like it's a big galaxy, but like Tatooine for this like world that, as much as Luke just complains.
If there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
Tatooine seems pretty dang important, like most of the time. They're at Tatooine for some reason. Luke gets involved in the plot kind of coincidentally. Like they're the closest planet to the pursuit of the, Corellian Corvette ship that Princess Leia is on in the beginning. Captain Antilles is the captain. I knew that one. Like, she's pursued, you know, like they've gotten the Death Star planned, and they're pursuing the ship, and they just happen to be near Tatooine. I guess Tatooine is somewhere in between where they got the plans, which is that place that I forgot about in Rogue One, and their destination, which is Alderaan. So Leia just like says it straight up in that video message, you know, that she records, that, to be fair, is not played entirely to Luke when he finds it. I thought that was really clever and a really good, you know, building some sort of dramatic tension there. And it's hard to know if it's R2-D2 that kind of makes that decision, or if it's part of, by like design, that it only reveals like who needs to be the one to receive the message, and then the actual person to receive the message gets the rest of it, and where they're going to go and where she was going to take Obi-Wan, and that was like her plan. I don't know that like saying that explicitly was maybe the smartest move. You'd think that the rebellion would have like a better code than not a code at all. But again, maybe there was something about like the message couldn't be accessed unless you were Obi-Wan Kenobi. But then, I mean, like, then why wouldn't they just like capture Obi-Wan Kenobi, since he's kind of like just there on this planet, and then force him to reveal the message, and that like that kind of information they would have gotten it anyway, it feels like. Part 5, Droids. So one kind of like just side thought that I had there is like how much I like the droids in this. I mean, the whole world is great. Like it is so lived in, and I think that's such a nice touch on, and I know it's not sci-fi, it's like science fantasy, but like a sci-fi kind of world. They're usually so pristine and clean and modern and just, you know, like sparkling and everything. And I just love how dirty things are in Star Wars. I love how like mismatched, like, you know, C-3PO's got that leg, or is it the arm? I don't remember. One part of him is silver. Like, things are kind of mismatched, and things are kind of used and dirty, and it just feels lived in. It feels like realistically what a future would kind of feel like, and not just like this pristine, perfect place. And one of the kind of the other things that I like about it is the way that the droids have so much personality. You know, the conversations that C-3PO really has with himself, because we're not privy to R2-D2's answers, but they give us a sense of kind of what they're saying to each other. And they're having like this little bickering argument in the beginning about which direction to go, and like R2-D2's on like a mission, and C-3PO is just like, what are you talking about, mission? And like he doesn't like just believe him, you know. It's just it's a great little detail. I know a lot of people talk about how C-3PO is really obnoxious, and I do think that, you know, there's probably a worthy conversation on the particular mannerisms he's given and queer coding, and that's maybe something for another time. C-3PO's kind of portrayal that can be obnoxious to some viewers or problematic to others. But I just love it. You know, not to disrespect those people, but like, I really enjoy C-3PO. I think he's like exactly the right amount of whiny and annoying. It works for me that he's just like, he's like a manners robot that is not pleased with having to do all this nonsense. Like, he made sense in like on a diplomatic mission. He makes sense from the perspective of the rebellion if they need a translator. Although like, they never seem to really actually need a translator in any of this, you know, even though they've got him and he's kind of like a protocol droid, and I guess he's supposed to understand customs and be able to translate and to kind of do those kind of things. But then like, you never really get a sense of like a time in which C-3PO would have been really useful for his intended purpose, because it just kind of seems that everyone just speaks every language, and that they all seem to just kind of get along and understand each other's customs, and that doesn't seem to be like a real source of conflict. But I love that he's just kind of like, that he's just reluctant. Like, he's just this kind of reluctant, scared, just not super happy to be going on this. And then R2-D2 seems to just kind of have like a lot of sass. Even though it just beeps, it just like, you just get like this sense of just like character underneath it. I think it's really, really cool when R2-D2 essentially tricks Luke and C-3PO as well because C-3PO definitely does not know that this is what he's doing, into taking off that restraining bolt. You know, he shows him that part of Leia's message, that help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. Then it's like, oh, well, if you take off my restraining bolt, I will show you the rest of the message. Is kind of like what he tells C-3PO, who, okay, all right, okay, so C-3PO does like translate that. So guess you weren't so useless after all, C-3PO. I apologize for the slander. So he does translate to Luke that remove this restraining bolt and I'll show you the rest of the message. Maybe I'll be able to find it, you know? But like, actually then he just cuts the message off entirely and then immediately escapes, now that the restraining bolt is gone and he can just like, see ya. And I think that that's really kind of funny and cool that not only is he like programmed, Leia quickly does whatever to put him on this mission, but he also will betray his like current owner and master. Like he will lie and do anything to make this happen. And I think that's kind of nice. And it gives like this kind of agency to these robot characters that are frequently kind of underestimated in these films. It's kind of funny in that they all work with the droids like all the time. It just seems like droids are ubiquitous and part of this world. And then they just like kind of forget about them too. So when the capsule like that they're in, you know, is expelled, they're like, oh, no life forms present. That's not a problem. Like, luckily, like Darth Vader like immediately is like, yeah, that was where the plans were, you idiots. Like, you know, and that kind of bureaucratic incompetence is, you know, it's not a plot hole to me. Like, I think that that's pretty realistic, having worked in office jobs and worked with management and bureaucracies before. Like, yeah, I could see that kind of thing happening. That's a little more realistic than the like stormtroopers who can never hit their target, even though in this film they explicitly say that the stormtroopers are like really good at shooting. A lot of people have talked about that kind of issue. I'm honestly okay with that too, generally, in that it's like we can't have the main characters die, but we also can't not have people pursuing them. So sometimes they're just gonna have plot armor, and that's just kind of how it is. And I do think that there are better versions of that in later works where the threat feels more real, and there is more tension when the main characters are being pursued, and it does seem like, you know, they could actually get hurt. And a lot of Star Wars does not that. Like, that just doesn't happen. You see people shooting at them and you're just like, well, that's not it. It's not a thing, that, you know, because we've just been kind of so trained that the stormtroopers are definitely going to miss. Part 6, Luke's journey continued. Okay, so we were still on Luke's journey. And one thing kind of about Luke is like he refuses the call to action. So Obi-Wan essentially tells him, you know, join me, Luke. You've got to learn the ways of the Force and help me. And like, this is important. And Luke's kind of like, but I'm a farmer. Even though like for the, you know, previous few minutes, like he was telling us about how much he hates that and how he would do anything to get away from it. But like Luke is like a good, responsible kind of person who won't just like shirk his obligation like that. I think this is a nice detail about Luke, that he doesn't just abandon his only family and his like home and, you know, everything that he's known immediately, even though he's really told us how much he would like to. He definitely is a character that has some sense of connection to other people and some sense of his responsibility in the world. And I'm really glad that they had that. They resolve this, of course, by more or less forcing Luke's hand through pursuit of the droids, like Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru's house is destroyed, and a surprisingly graphic scene, probably the most graphic for Star Wars that I can recall. And maybe when I watch the rest of the films again, I'll find something else that seems like it, but this is about as graphic as it gets. You know, they are brutally killed, and those horrible skeletons are outside that house. And I think Mark Hamill's acting there is just really lovely. I mean, you can see on his face, you can see that kind of disbelief and that pain. And then like even though he kind of knew when he set off this way that this is what was going to happen, and just that like really subtle like look down that he does of just like resigned to accepting that in some ways he's gotten what he wanted. Like, he's free from this obligation now, but you get that moment where you see the cost, like where it doesn't just like revel in like Luke's newfound freedom. Like, you see that he's really lost something here, and like, no, there's nothing else for him on this planet And I just think that that's just a really great, powerful moment that a lesser film might have just kind of skipped over or come up with some other reason that he could get out of this. But like, I thought that that was really, really powerful to see losing more or less everything that he's known before he starts on this journey where he kind of finds the new version of himself. There is one other scene that I want to talk about that of another kind of subtle Mark Hamill as Luke moment. And it's before this one, actually. And it's the binary sunset that I think everyone knows kind of what I'm talking about here, because it's like the beautiful, I think it's the Force theme that plays. And like Luke goes outside and he's kind of defeated at this point because he's lost this little argument with Uncle Owen about being able to leave. And so I think he like kicks the dirt and he's kind of, oh, whatever. But then he like looks like off into this binary sunset, and it's so wistful and it's so beautiful, like such a beautifully shot scene. And they have the sense to just kind of let the music swell underneath him and just let us see that longing in Luke's eyes, you know, and not like comment on it and not over explain it. And like, they've told us what Luke wants and what Luke is trying to do, and then they trust us to be there with him on that journey. And I think that's one thing that this film does so well that a lot of films, especially recent films, just don't, which is like, they give us the information that we need. There is a lot of exposition in this movie. There is quite a lot of like expositional dialogue where people are like talking about, oh, but you know, they have the plans and then we got to stop them because this is, it's like, okay, like it does rely on that a little bit too much, especially between like unnamed characters, but you kind of just forget it. Like, I honestly had forgotten that really happened until I rewatched the movie. But because I guess it's like the no names, I notice it less than in current things where everyone is just like telling us how they feel all the time, very explicitly.
Your lyrics lack subtlety. You can't just have your characters announce how they feel. That makes me feel angry.
Or someone says the author's point of view in a long, you know, diatribe. That I think is something that doesn't really happen very much in at least these early films, and it's better for it. Okay. Luke is like 19, I think, or so at the beginning, or maybe 17. He's like late teens. And Luke is like surprisingly competent. His plans are a little half-baked, like when he decides that they're going to go rescue the princess. He doesn't really think that one through. You know, he doesn't have a plan for their escape. Princess Leia gives him some snark about it. For the most part, like, Luke is a smart, resourceful guy who, you know, is able to kind of read people and their intentions. He's like, he thinks that, you know, Han initially is, you know, trying to take them for a ride, and he kind of correctly assesses his character, the kind of, you know, he's only in it for the money, and realizes that that's what he needs to offer Han to get him on his side. You know, he's pretty decent with a blaster, even though he kind of fires it like he's never held one before, but he's pretty effective. He's pretty effective in the, like, space battle getaway when they finally do get off the Death Star. He's pretty good. You get the sense that he's not, like, a total moron, that if he could learn this Force thing that Obi-Wan keeps just yammering on about even after he's dead, that once Luke kind of masters the Force and really connects with his kind of Jedi heritage, that's kind of what he needs to unlock to really get to the next level. And so that's kind of his arc, is like establishing his place in this world, and the fact that, you know, he actually can affect it after he's spent, you know, his lifetime kind of wanting to. Like, it turns out that he really can. And Luke, you know, doesn't really have like a lot of internal conflict. He doesn't really seem to doubt himself. He really believes Obi-Wan when Obi-Wan's talking to him, even when Han's making fun of him for doing so. I think that's kind of nice, like that, unlike a lot of kind of later young adult stories, and I'm using young adult here in the sense that is like the age that Luke is. I know this isn't like the same thing as like the young adult genre of fiction that didn't really exist at this point, but a lot of them are about kind of overcoming doubts and learning to be confident in yourself and your abilities. And it's kind of nice when you have a protagonist who more or less is, but who's just hasn't been part of the world yet, who's grown up pretty isolated and sheltered from it. And watching Luke kind of come into his own is really satisfying, and it's really, we're really rooting for him, you know, throughout. Like, he's he's so likable. He's, you know, funny and relatable, and the kind of flaws that he has, you know, where he is a little naive, they're believable and they don't get on your damn nerves, which is really nice. I think he just is a really strong character, and I think when you see him succeed at the end, it's just a really great moment. I think the whole setup to kind of the trench run and the ending of the movie and, you know, the destruction of the Death Star is really good too, because Luke is the main character in this story. From our perspective, we know Luke is the main character, but like the other characters don't know that, and I like that. Like, they don't just put him in the original plan. Like, he's not in plan A for this Death Star destruction run. He's not with the Gold Squad and the Y-Wings. He's not even the head of the Red Squad or anything. Like, and the Red Squad leader even is kind of like, hey man, do you know how to fly this thing? Because we're a rebellion and we probably need all the people that we can get, but also this is pretty important. If we fail this mission, we'll all die. So maybe, you know, sit this one out, kid, if you're not up for it. And then his buddy is like, oh yeah, no, Luke is the best. And that's enough for them. They're a scrappy ragtag group of rebels. And so they're not they seem to have a fairly organized military structure and everything. But okay, fine. Well, you know, Biggs's word is enough. I'm fine with that. But I like that they don't have him, you know, in the prominent, I'm gonna destroy the Death Star, leader, gold leader role. And that, you know, he's really not even plan B. It's really kind of plan C, that this last remaining kind of group of X-Wing fighters that could do this, but, you know, that wasn't the original design. And so that's nice that they didn't just immediately or you're the one who should solve all of our problems because you're the main character and we're aware of that.
I wasn't the one who solved the problem, and neither was Lisa. There's something unsettling about that.
Luke's story ends, you know, with his victory, and again, he doesn't really doubt himself leading up to that. It's not like he misses a bunch of times and then decides that he's going to try this Force thing that his dead mentor is somehow still talking to him about. Obi-Wan is trust the Force, and Luke's yeah, okay, that sounds right, that's a good idea. And he just turns off his computer and everyone else is what in the hell? And it just works out. And I feel a lot of movies would put a little bit more conflict in Luke himself, in his belief in the Force. And I do think, you know, obviously in Empire, and I'll talk about that more once I make my Empire review, but we do get to see a bit of that, and that it's not all just super, super easy for Luke at this point. But it's nice to kind of see an early victory without a whole lot of hemming and hawing about, you know, should I do this? Is this real? At this point, I think that would have been somewhat of a distraction, you know, from the kind of straightforward story that they're telling here. I also, in kind of a straightforward storytelling moment, another one that I really like is when Obi-Wan Kenobi finds Luke and rescues him, and Luke is catching him up on the events of the story so far, and, you know, how he came to have this droid, and what, you know, this droid is after Ben, you know, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and who's an Obi-Wan Kenobi? Do you know him? And I like how Ben Kenobi, you know, he doesn't immediately answer, but he also doesn't withhold that information. He doesn't turn it into this whole thing where he's oh, I'm so mysterious and I won't tell you who I am, and it all will be revealed. He's just
well, of course I know him. He's me.
I like that. He just doesn't beat around the bush on that one. The whole performance, I mean, Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan Kenobi is very good. It's just very understated. He does come across a little eccentric, but it's not Flanderized. And I'm referring to the Simpsons character Ned Flanders there, who became more and more Ned Flanders as time went on. I could see a very kooky, eccentric Obi-Wan Kenobi that you wouldn't really understand why Luke could respect him. And I think it's good that, you know, while this guy is a little weird, and he's clearly been away from people for a while, and he's, a little different, and he definitely sincerely believes in something that a lot of people seem to think is just nonsense, even though there's like solid evidence. I mean, this isn't like, they talk about this as like a religion, but this isn't like the power of prayer or something where it's like up for interpretation what's happening. I mean, Darth Vader, like one of the first things is he like literally chokes someone with, he's just like, well, I mean, okay, so I guess he actually does like physically choke someone at one point, but at another point he does like, he just like kind of squeezes. My hand looks really weird. He just kind of like squeezes, and that chokes somebody, and it's like, okay, you guys are like making fun of this religion, but like it's happening in front of your eyes, like you can see it. I just find it really strange. Like I can see where like Han Solo was like, oh, it's just tricks and stuff. Like it's just like, that's just he got lucky. It's just a trick, like that kind of thing. Like, okay, that's fine. Probably most of the stuff that he has heard or seen, since most of the Jedi are supposed to be gone, like maybe the people that he's been seeing weren't actually even Jedi. Like they were just people who were just trying to make a buck. I mean, that makes sense for the world that, Han operates from. But for everybody else, it's like who actually is directly in contact with either Obi-Wan Kenobi or Darth Vader, who are our kind of two known Jedi or Sith, former Jedi, dark side Jedi. I don't even know if they use the word Sith in this. I can't remember. They have the hard proof in front of them. So it's kind of weird when they're just like, you're a silly old religion, when they can kind of see the power of it. I don't know. Minor nitpick. Part 7, Princess Leia. Leia's kind of interesting in this, in that she doesn't really have so much of an arc as she is like the plot. Like Leia has, some great lines. Leia is a great, strong character. She definitely doesn't fit the damsel kind of thing, even though they do rescue her technically. She is very clearly strong and independent and competent and a leader within this rebellion, and more important than pretty much everybody else in the story at this point. But also, like, because of that, because she's kind of already self-actualized, she doesn't go through like a journey in the way that like Luke does, or even Han. I'll talk a little bit about Han's journey in a minute. Leia, she's kind of already there. Like, I guess she's kind of already at the destination of her character development. She's kind of already the best version of herself. She doesn't really need to develop at this point. And I think that works. I mean, I think she's kind of the Hermione of the story, where she's just this incredibly competent woman who ends up in a set of circumstances that she can't get herself out of. And not really because she's incompetent, but just because like really no one could get themselves out of this set of circumstances. Like it's not feasible, like, but she does everything that she can to like set herself up to be rescued, So basically when we meet, Leia, they've got the plans, and she's got a plan, and her plan is to pick up Obi-Wan Kenobi and then take him and these plans to Alderaan to meet with her father, who's apparently somebody important. They don't really talk about, I think his name's Bail Organa, I can't remember, from the later movies, the prequel series. They don't really talk about him here, but just that, he would be able to interpret these plans. And so that's what they're doing, is they're heading there instead of to this rebel base, which is what Darth Vader and Tarkin and everybody else is trying to figure out the location of the rebel base so they can crush the rebellion. And so when their ship is being captured, Leia sends the plans off with R2-D2 and C-3PO, and so this sets the plot in motion. She has the plans, she sets the plot in motion, like she sends them to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was supposed to accompany her anyway. Not 100% clear on why, other than perhaps just to take on Darth Vader. The rest of kind of the plot moves from there. So she's really the reason for the inciting incident. The plot kind of progresses through her, through the Death Star. Choosing Alderaan as its target was part of the ploy to get the information out of her when she doesn't respond to the mind probe torture kind of thing. About the rebel base location, and so she reveals that it's at Dantooine, but actually that was an old base. So even with when faced with the extermination of her home world, she lies. And that's, Darth Vader basically kind of defends her through this, which I think maybe is part of the setup to her eventual relationship to him. In that he basically says, no, we're not going to get anything out of her. But also opposes her execution. I think, that's maybe part of what they kind of built off of to eventually make her into spoilers for a 45-year-old movie series, Luke's sister, and that Darth Vader is Leia's father. Maybe that was one of those details that kind of led to that, as kind of Darth Vader's defense of Leia and his, she could be still of some use to us yet. Instead of he's supposed to be just kind of evil but he basically opposes her execution, which I thought was an interesting moment. Leia, she lies about the rebel base location, and then she's, there to be executed, but because the ship that an Imperial spy, the Millennium Falcon, saw leaving Mos Eisley with the droids, has now been captured because they show up to go to Alderaan to meet with Princess Leia, but Alderaan's gone. The Millennium Falcon is captured, and so now that they're here, now Leia could still be useful because she had something to do with those droids, and maybe they'll be able to get some more information out of her from that. So they keep her alive, and then the next moment that the plot stalls, which is they've gotten on the ship and Obi-Wan decides he's going to take on Darth Vader on his own. And so they're, kind of stuck there, waiting. And then R2-D2 finds Princess Leia in her prison cell. And so now this is the next mission. And so she just kind of keeps driving the plot forward. And then when they rescue Princess Leia, but they don't have a plan to escape, she's kind of the one who's like, let's go down the garbage chute. And so she just kind of keeps moving things forward through the plot. She's always pretty much competent. She picks up a gun and fires it whenever she gets a chance. She's usually giving some sass to, Luke and Han, mostly to Han, about their kind of general incompetence. And again, I think it's really less like I don't actually think either Luke or Han are incompetent as characters, but they don't do this. She's been part of this rebellion for a while. She's from this world and really, is used to doing these kind of spy missions, and, all of these kind of fighting is completely just normal for her. Whereas Han is a smuggler, and so he's kind of got that smuggler experience, so he does have some, something adjacent to kind of the spy world that they're in now. But then poor old Luke, he's a farm boy, So I think we can let Luke have a pass that he doesn't have everything perfectly figured out, and requires the princess to rescue kind of herself after they help her get that initial push. And I do think that kind of teamwork of they all bring something kind of different to the table, and that they're all needed in some way is really nice. It's one of my primary criticisms with actually quite a few stories where you feel like the supporting cast doesn't really have much to contribute. That the protagonists could basically do everything that they needed to on their own. And so you're just kind of okay, why is Ron Weasley here? I guess he can play chess, and not so much with Hermione, because again, similar to Leia, she's just pretty much self-actualized and smart and capable from the get-go, and is just thrown into situations that only Harry Potter could solve. And so, it's not really her fault that she's not Harry Potter, It's not really Leia's fault that she gets she's imprisoned for this part of it. And it seemed like she was at least trying to figure out some way out, or she had really more or less accepted her fate. She still ensured the victory of the rebels, or did everything that she could to ensure it. And so her own death, you got the sense that she probably would rather not die, but also that she sure as hell was not going to give them anything to help them. And if she had to die for this cause, that she would. I think it works very well in contrast to Han. And I guess it's a good segue to start talking about Han Solo. Part 8, Han Solo. Man, I hated Han Solo when I was a kid. I think that's really funny to say now because, Han Solo is this prototypical rogue type that all the women always fall in love with. He's a bad boy, but he's got a heart of gold deep down. And you know that if you just like give him the right look and the right like sweet romantic speech, you can change him. Like you can fix him. He's like the female fantasy. And he's Harrison Ford, just looking just as fresh as a summer rose. That's not a very good. I don't know where I got that one from. But you know, he's looking great out there. And what was funny is like, I remember watching this when I was pretty young. I think it was the second, like they did like a theatrical re-release leading up to the prequels. So in the late 90s. And so I was a kid, and I talked a little earlier about George Lucas and good and versus evil and the like not super nuanced way that he looks at it, and how like Han couldn't do this like bad thing and still be like a good guy. And I was kind of deriding that a bit, but also like when I first saw this, like I definitely had that super simplistic good versus evil viewpoint myself. And so I kind of hated Han Solo because like to me, he was just like a bad guy. He was a smuggler and a criminal, and he owed people money, and he was like shot people, and he was a scumbag, and was rude to Princess Leia and like discounted her like female thing.
To just avoid any more female advice, we ought to be able to get out of here.
Or whatever that he says. And I just like didn't like him at all. And I was like, who is this asshole? Like, why is there this like jerk off character in this movie? Like Luke is the hero. Luke is supposed to get the girl in the end. And this is just like my simplistic child views of what was going on here. And so I was like real confused when I saw Empire Strikes Back, and I'm like, what? Leia hates him. You know, he's like a total jerk to her, and he dismisses her, and he doesn't, you know, like he doesn't deserve Leia. And so I guess like the thing that George Lucas said about like what he was trying to avoid was the thing that I saw as a kid. But, you know, I was a kid. All I had to really go on up until this point was like Disney movies mostly. I guess probably the closest character that I had seen to Han Solo was Gaston in Beauty and the Beast, who is arrogant and flashy, and, you know, like everyone kind of loves him, but he's clearly a jerk, and he discounts Belle, and like the kind of the treatment between like Han Solo and Leia was the closest to Gaston and Belle, the way he like treated her like she isn't strong, competent woman that she is, but also was kind of a coward in the end, you know? And so I didn't really see the kind of nuance of his development until I was much older, probably much older. He's like the second or third most important character in this. I'd say probably the third in this one. I mean, I do think that Obi-Wan's plot and Leia's plot, like the things that they go through are probably more important overall to the film, but Han does have kind of an arc, more of an arc, you know, than we at least understand from like Obi-Wan's perspective, because at this point Obi-Wan is clearly on a mission. You know, he's doing something. He's got this confrontation with Darth Vader that he needs to go and do alone. Darth Vader was his student previously, but we don't really get a sense beyond, you know, things that are just not really explained to us at this point, what Obi-Wan's goals and motivations are. He's here to kind of guide Luke along on this journey and to settle some sort of score with Darth Vader. And it's frankly kind of confusing when he sacrifices himself, partially because of the way that scene is like framed, because it just seems a little unnecessary and almost like it actually jeopardizes their mission because of Luke's reaction to seeing Obi-Wan be killed in that moment. But regardless, like we just don't really get as much of a sense of Obi-Wan's motivations. I think the prequel trilogy attempts to flesh out a bit of that. I don't know how successful I would call it. Gives some reasons, I guess. But Han, on the other hand, because we're still talking about Han's motivations are a lot more clear. They're said several times, actually, that, you know, all he really cares about is the money. And it's clear that, like, this guy is not necessarily someone who cares about the money because he's just like a scoundrel who's just the Jeff Bezos of Star Wars and just hoards his angry dragon money pile. He owes money to Jabba the Hutt in what is truly one of the most painful George Lucas editing something after the fact scenes ever, with Jabba like showing up and the like whole confrontation there. Ugh, I just try to pretend like my eyes have not seen that every time I look at it, because I just hate this scene in an otherwise pretty good movie. Mostly because it's unnecessary. Because we established this in the scene with Greedo, that, you know, he's got a bounty on his head because he owes money to Jabba the Hutt. Like they say, like they go through all of that. He's gonna get this money because he's been hired for this charter mission. Obi-Wan, the world's worst negotiator. I mean, Han says 10K and Obi-Wan's like 17. Like, it's like that scene from Futurama where like Amy's gonna buy the car, the Ford Thunder Cougar Falconbird. You know, and she just starts like pushing the price up because she's rich and out of touch.
The sticker says 55,000, but we'll only go as high as, say,
60,000!
Obi-Wan, man. Like, not only are you giving him more money than you need to, but you also probably are making him concerned about like the safety of this mission, considering like there are stormtroopers like marching around in this bar, like as they're having the conversation, being like, uh-oh, there those guys are. So like, I mean, personally, I think I would play that card a little closer to the chest, that we're in that much trouble, because I feel like if Han Solo were really a smart dragon Jeff Bezos guy in this universe, he would be like, okay, so I initially said 10K, you said 17, and then I see these stormtroopers like right behind you, and you clearly are in some serious trouble. So now the price is 20. I mean, I'm not even like Jeff Bezos dragon hoarding type, but like, I'm pretty sure I would have been like, oh, haha, like you really need this ship. But okay, so like Han is like not in it for the money in the sense that, you know, he just wants all the money. He owes someone money who's trying to have him killed. And it will be real good to not have that problem anymore. So I feel like it's framed later on, like, where kind of Leia's criticizing him as like, oh, you're only in it for the money. But like also, well, yeah, I mean, that's true. He'll die if he doesn't get that money. So I don't think it's like so bad, you know? But nonetheless, he still gets this arc of like, oh, he's only going to do it for the money. And all he cares about is, you know, where's the money? And then, you know, as soon as they get through, like he gets them to Alderaan, but Alderaan's gone. It's more than he's bargained for. But like, you know, he's not doing anything. And then Luke convinces him to go get Leia because there's more money in it. And then like they get off the Death Star and he's like, all right, we got out, you know, like he still fights his way out, and it seems like he has a little bit of camaraderie with Luke during that, and then it's like, all right, I'm done. I'm out of here, you know. But he doesn't like ditch them immediately. Like he doesn't just drop them off at the nearest spaceport or anything, which I feel like, again, he could do. But instead, he does take them to the Rebel base on Yavin 4, and then he's just like, I'm gonna leave. Which, like, again, pretty much fair. Like, he's not really involved in this rebellion, but you know, it is nice the way that they frame this as like, you know, now that you've seen what the Empire is capable of, now that you've seen them destroy an entire planet, how can you not care? And like, how can you not fight against that? And I think that that's actually, they don't ever explicitly say that. They don't come out and spell out kind of the thesis of like, Han should care now, if not about the people that he's just kind of gone through this with, but about the fate of this world. But then they do take the time to critique him that he doesn't, that, you know, he's just leaving. And I think that's nice because it's a really, you know, it's a good foil for Luke and Leia, who are very motivated by, you know, clearly their connections to other people and doing the right thing, and they're just good, you know, and they're trying to fight this evil empire. And so I think Han's kind of, you know, opposing viewpoint where he just doesn't really care, even though he's impacted by it and everyone's impacted by it. is really nice. And it, the payoff is all the better when Han comes and rescues Luke at the last moment, which is another great example of this role that this character could play. He's useful in this final conflict because kind of all hope is lost and Luke is their last chance and they don't have any more fighters left, but there's one more ship kind of left that could join this fight, and that's the Millennium Falcon. I don't know why there's only like one more ship that could join this fight. I mean, a small nitpick, but it does feel like if this is the end of the rebellion, like they are staring down the end, right? Like this is not just a skirmish. This is not just a battle. Like, this thing will destroy the base of the rebellion, at least this very significant base of the rebellion. Like, it feels like they should just go ham. Like, every last thing that the rebellion has, they should throw at it. And I get, like, kind of the thematic point here, and this is actually kind of a good transition to theme. Part 9, Themes. The thematic point of the little guy, the David versus Goliath, the Empire has underestimated the impact of an individual. One of the major themes of Star Wars in general is like the power of the individual, one single person, what they can do against a force, that's gargantuan, that is, larger than life, and that they can actually make a difference and have an impact. And so, like, in a way, even though it is kind of it's an organized military rebellion, like they are small individual fighters. Like the ships are so small that the cannons can't fire at them, so they have to, get out in the TIE fighters to take them on. And so I think from the thematic sense, like, if the rebellion throws every single ship that they have at the problem, like it loses a little bit of that weight, because although it's still an unfair fight because, the rebellion doesn't have a Death Star, like it levels it a lot more. And I can let that slide. I think it's reasonable that the battle needs to feel smaller. And I mean, there's the argument too of like, if they do fire everything at them, they'll know their plan. But they actually kind of, like, the Empire does figure out the plan really quickly. They have that whole scene where they go up to Grand Moff Tarkin and they're like,
"We've analyzed their attack, sir, and there is a danger. Should I have your ship standing by?"
They figure out the vulnerability, because of course they could figure out the vulnerability in their own system. They were blind to it until the rebellion started trying to attack it, and then they see it. Also really nice. Like I love that detail. I think many movies would have just been like, uh-oh, we don't know what they're doing. Like, but like, this is a competent military force, something that's, powerful enough and well organized enough to create something that has the capability of destroying a planet in a single shot. And that, I think, means that they should be able to figure out what the rebellion's up to. And so it's good that they do. But then that also kind of hurts any arguments that are like, oh, but they'll figure out the plan, because they just did figure out the plan, but they were powerless kind of to stop it anyway. Because it seems like they couldn't just fix that problem. They couldn't just like close that shaft or, send something out to protect it. I mean, okay, you have to like take the whole trench run battle with a little bit of a grain of salt, because it doesn't make like a whole lot of sense. I mean, space is 3-dimensional, so the need to like run along the trench instead of like running at it. I know that they've, again, tried to like justify that in universe with various things about the cannons and, okay, sure. Let's say that there's a reasonable explanation for that. But then, again, why don't they send all the ships? And why doesn't the Empire just defend that shaft? Why are there so few TIE fighters, and why are they all focused on attacking the, X-Wings and Y-Wings? Like, why don't some of them just like literally just keep circling around that shaft and blasting away the photon torpedoes or whatever it is that they use? This is kind of like a, castle defense kind of thing. And it's like they choose to go battle out in the open field when it's like, but you have a castle. I forget, I was watching a movie recently where they did that, where they were like, they had a castle and for some reason they chose to fight like in the field. They met them in the field. And I'm like, but it's a castle. Like, do you understand the purpose of like a fortification? The Death Star is a weapon and it's a space station and it's like a really, freaking huge space station, right? I mean, there's got to be a lot of people on this thing. I just felt like their defenses were a little inadequate considering how many people were on it. It just felt like they could have really mobilized a force that, and honestly, even if they had, like, Luke still could have made the shot because he has the force and he believes in himself and power of friendship. And, they're like, that would have still been a fine solution. I think they just could have made the odds that Luke was up against feel a little more realistic. It would have increased the tension, but ultimately the outcome would have been the same. Part 10, more themes and impact. I'm going to just kind of wrap up with just a quick discussion on a bit more of the kind of the themes of Star Wars and kind of the impact of this particular film on the later films and where this film succeeded and others that kind of came later struggled and kind of why. I think what this film really gets right is the scale of things, where while this is, they give you that big galactic opening and these enormous spaceships and these whole worlds and we get this really big sense of scale, but then the movie has the sense to immediately narrow our focus. The thing about people and numbers, big numbers, just we can't make sense of them and they can start becoming meaningless. One death is a tragedy, but 10 or 100 or 1,000, they're a statistic. And so I think while it does have one of those enormous tragic events, the destruction of Alderaan, where literally millions or possibly billions of people die, we are focused in on a handful of individuals. And that matches the theme of the movie about the power of the individual, against this, these enormous forces. But it also just works from the perspective of getting us to care. The more random people that are kind of thrown into plots, especially in some of the later entries, the more little side stories and things that go nowhere, the harder it is to really care about the main story and the core point. I think that complex storytelling with a lot of perspectives and a lot of characters can be effective. And I think that characters with small roles can have a major impact. I'm thinking of the episode Hardhome of Game of Thrones. I think it's in season 6. Where you meet that wildling woman kind of at the beginning of the episode, and she's a mother, and you learn very little about her ultimately, but just enough to make you care about her. And when she meets her fate at the end, you care, and it works really well. But that's it's really hard to do, and it's hard enough to do in television where you can devote a whole episode to a person. But within the movie kind of world, you really get very little time to develop a connection to any kind of single individual. And so I think focusing in on the tight core group within the original trilogy is one of its major strengths. I mean, there are a lot of side characters in this. A lot of them are named. A lot of those people eventually have entire backstories in some canon works and some in, outside of canon, the legends, whatever that Disney's calling it these days, based on just what little one-liners that they have in this. But those people, they all are part of building this world, a world that feels real and that feels large and that feels like it has this big impact, but they're not essential to it. They're one note. We don't really get a sense of who they are and what their wants and needs and their things are. And I think that's a strength of it. I think trying to make every single character a well-rounded, fully realized person that we can all relate to is kind of a fruitless endeavor, especially in a movie. And so I think the movie pulls just the right amount of focus on the handful of individuals that matter and balances that nicely with the impact that they're having on the wider world through small interactions. If they'd grounded the Alderaan scene in a story and did something essentially like Hardhome, where they gave us a character, an Alderaan, that we could follow for a couple of scenes so that we could really feel the full weight of that tragedy, it would have made that feel more realistic and tragic, but also it would have really bogged that movie down. There's a lot of people die in A New Hope. Luke loses not just his aunt and uncle, but like Biggs, his childhood friend, dies. Just about most of the people he kind of encounters like do not end well. Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I think that by kind of, I'm not going to say that it glances over those moments, but it quickly keeps moving past that and basically says, these people, like, they had lives that did matter, but like they're gone now, and we got to keep going, because what matters is the revolution. What matters is the rebellion. Like, the rebellion is bigger than any single individual, but every single individual counts. Even though people who are part of the rebellion die, the rebellion lives on. And I think it is a really cool thing where it balances that perspective of like, even the smallest person can make a difference but the sum is greater than the parts. It kind of walks both lines and does so effectively. There's some things that are kind of unexamined by the film. One of those things is the Empire actually truly evil? Is the rebellion truly good? Are the goals of the rebellion truly the best thing for the galaxy? Is this revolution, is the cost, is the sacrifice, are the actual people being lost, is it worth it? Those answers are presupposed. The movie tells you just straight up yes, basically asks that you don't question that. And I think that's okay here. But I do wish that Star Wars as a universe would kind of look more deeply into those questions, because especially in modern times, because I think that's something that modern audiences really want to talk about. We do want to see more nuance in things, and I think that, you know, the existence of communities like the Empire did nothing wrong, and people who like cosplay as stormtroopers, I think there's definitely a desire to see the good beyond this kind of empire. And okay, you can make the argument of like, oh, but we have reformed stormtroopers in the sequels and whatnot. But like the individuals are reformed, but like there's still really not a lot of examination on like what the Empire or the First Order or whatever, why they're evil, like why they're just so bad, and why the rebellion is a better option, and like what the rebellion's even going to look like once the rebellion is over. Like once they've won, they restore the Republic, I guess. I mean, they say that based on the prequels, the Republic was not without its problems. I don't know. I always kind of like the ending of things where it's sort of ambiguous as to like whether what they've actually done is right or better. I like it in The Hunger Games. I don't really love the ending of The Hunger Games as a whole. Like Mockingjay as a book was just not, it was not fun to get through for me personally. And the two movies, I think there were two movies. That's like how well I remember them, is that I can't actually remember if there were two of those movies or one. I'm pretty sure there were two. Conceptually, I liked a lot about it, but in practice, man, I just did not enjoy those. But the kind of the core concept of it is there's an alternative to the Capitol who rules in the Hunger Games, this rebellion they're doing against their unquestioned evil dictatorship. Also, the woman who's like leading that is kind of just as bad and wants the same thing in different ways. Katniss kind of realizes this, and spoilers for the end of the Hunger Games trilogy. So she has the opportunity to kind of kill the Darth Vader, the Emperor, whatever, you know, the main bad guy, but instead she kind of kills the leader of the supposed good guys because she's kind of realized that the alternative isn't really much better. And I do think that was like a very interesting take that I don't think is within the realm of things that Star Wars is capable of doing after watching a lot of these movies now. And that's kind of a shame, because I think that could have been interesting, especially with how kind of the rebellion acts and looks and feels in the sequels. Here, they just feel very heroic in this first film. They just feel very good and heroic, organized and right, and they're up against the odds, but darn it, maybe these kids are gonna win. You can't help but root for them. People who were like hardcore on the side of the Empire at this point in the story, I don't know, man. Like, I'm sure you're out there, but like, I mean, it's just like the people who were Slytherin, like identify as Slytherin in Harry Potter. Like, I get it later, you know, because they don't make Slytherin out to be as bad, but like, in the beginning, like, Slytherin's just straight up evil. The Empire's just straight up evil. And people who identify with that and like sympathize with that, I don't get it. Evil's cool, I guess. Like, evil has a cool aesthetic usually, and like not caring is nice, I guess, and convenient in some way. But I just was never one of those people who really identified with the bad guys to the extent that I didn't like Han Solo because I thought he was bad. I always identified with the hero, the protagonist, the main character, which is probably unsurprising considering I'm making these like super long, very self-indulgent videos. This is some real main character energy. I know this. But anyway, the good versus evil thing is something that I wish they would examine a little bit more. But it was pretty simple at this point. This is a pretty simple story in a complex world that could be expanded upon and merchandised and commodified and everything else that kind of eventually happened to it. But it is nice when you kind of go back and you watch this and you imagine them making this movie today. A Disney executive seeing the burned up bodies of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, or seeing some of the kind of edgier banter.
To just avoid any more female advice, we ought to be able to get out of here.
And you can just imagine like someone being like, no, that's not going to sell us enough action figures. These guys have got to be likable, and no, we can't have graphic scenes in our film because that's just off-putting for the children, and we need that demographic, or we're never going to sell enough toys or theme park rides and everything else. I don't know, there's nothing new or original about that cynical take about our commercial world. But it is hard to kind of ignore what Star Wars has become in a lot of ways, and wishing in some ways that it was smaller still, that it was just the vision of one person, and that it still felt like the story that it tells about the one individual against the giant behemoth. And now it's very much the giant behemoth itself. Maybe there would be some interesting metatextual analysis if they made a story that was kind of like that. Well, we set out to be the rebellion, but we all kind of became the empire in the end. There's a lot of things that take that perspective, and I know that Star Wars is not really that for most people, and we're looking for some cool lightsaber battles and all the other fun stuff we talked about. But I do think it would be interesting to see maybe in some of these kind of companion stories. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers not even like 10% of the thoughts I have about this. I really can just I can just talk. But I think that's a pretty good end for this kind of first review. I'm going to try to do one of these a week. I'm going to try to get through the whole movie series and those companion films, also the TV shows to the extent that I can watch all of them. I'll probably do kind of like a review per season for the TV shows rather than a 2-hour review per episode of something. Maybe not super interesting for most people. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you do, I hope you, what do they say on this thing? Smash that like, hit your lawyer, go to the gym, subscribe, and I hope you'll be back and see me next week.